I will speak about a book on which I work on. It's called The Invention of Safe Countries. And it is very much kind of PhD work that I now try to turn into writing. So the empirical data is collected. It should somewhere be published by Springer and the IMISCO research series, but still I am in the process of writing. And what has guided this research is kind of really the idea that the notion of safety has become central to asylum governance. So we have seen the emergence and proliferations of different types of safe country policies on the one side, and we have also seen the spread of these policies. And 3 examples to begin with. So the Syrian Observer, for instance, asked, in light of the EU's new migration law, is Syria a safe country? So referring to the question of processing of Syrian asylum cases, also to the returns of Syrians. We have the Dublin regulation, which is based on the idea that a person has a connection with another European country, for instance, through transit, through visa, through family, so that this country should take responsibility. And we have things like the UK-Rwanda deal, which I call unsafe fourth country policies, because the person has no connection to this country, which have also proliferated. And the idea of this book is really kind of to trace the emergence and the spread of these policies. So I have 3 main questions that I asked. First, through which geographical and temporal patterns are these, I call them unsafe country policies, spreading? So do we see, for instance, not only kind of the end of the deterrence paradigm, as some have said, but given that these policies are so central and a central part of this deterrence paradigm, do we see actually an expansion of this paradigm? Then also, what is the motivation? So through what mechanisms are driving the spread and diffusion of these policies? And then also, what are the broader implications of this spread? So theory is policy diffusion, which means that we do not try to explain policy development from a domestic politics perspective. So not to say, well, it's history, it's internal factors that are responsible to explain the adoption of these policies, but really that policy choices in one country are influencing policy choices in another countries. And then the question is, then through which mechanisms are these policies spreading, which is what this typology that we have developed is trying to do. And we say, well, there's interest, ideology, rights, and recognition-driven mechanism, and apply this theory then to the empirical cases. What I try to do in the empirical part is like first really to draw the very big picture and to say, well, how have these policies spread on a global level? And I did so by setting up 2 datasets. One is the constitutional asylum dataset, one is safe country policies dataset, because for states who introduce these policies and reduce their responsibility, they of course have to acknowledge it and recognize state responsibility in the first place. So I tried with the constitutional asylum dataset to go back actually to the French Revolution and trace the spread of constitutional asylum. And then I also look at national asylum frameworks in the safe country policies dataset, and then really the spread of these policies that then reduce state responsibility, and it goes through all UN member states. When we look at the spread of national asylum frameworks, we can see that actually roughly 2/3 of all UN member states have now adopted national asylum frameworks. I think it's quite interesting to see that it's a much more complex process than we thought. So it's not at all kind of from the west to the rest. It's very much a patchy process and complex, starting in Africa. Also, Iraq was very early, Latin America. So it's really kind of a parallel and complex process how these policies have spread, with nonetheless 1/3 of all countries in Northern Africa, Middle East, and Asia that are not regulating refugee protection comprehensively. More importantly than for me was really to show the spread of these safe country policies, and really to see that while we speak often about the UK and Denmark, Europe, Australia, we can see that these policies have spread much wider than we thought. So we can see, for instance, many countries in Central Asia that have adopted these policies, some nonetheless in Latin America, which is often perceived a liberal outlier, but also particularly in Southern Africa, we see quite a number of states that actually take on these policies that are otherwise often seen as being the restrictive policies of the so-called liberal democracies. In the second part of the book, and that's one slide only, I then try to approach a follow the policies approach. So I take 3 of these policies and I really try to trace what was the context of the emergence of these policies and how have these policies spread. So lots of archival work, policy document analysis, parliamentary debates, but then also a lot of expert interviews with those who have kind of shaped or adopted these policies. And while I take the policies as cases, I nonetheless focus on Denmark, Switzerland, and South Africa, given that these have been very central to the emergence, or then also in the case of South Africa now for the spread in new regions that have not received so much attention until now. I come to the conclusion. 3 points that I just want to make. One, it's beyond competition and race to the bottom. So what are the mechanisms? How are they spreading? Often we speak about competition. It's a race to the bottom. Every country wants to be more restrictive. And what I see, it's way more complex when you look at these mechanisms of how these policies are spreading. The second is really beyond the global north. So these policies that have often been used and invented by states in the global north are really spreading far beyond the global north. And I would say potentially are also leading to new patterns of injustices between states that host the majority of people seeking protection. And last point, beyond the international refugee regime. So we can see how these policies are creating kind of contestation with the legal system. We can think about the Italy-Albania case. We can think about states trying to get out of the European Convention of Human Rights. So these policies are also part and at the center that leads to a broader conflict between law and politics. And therefore, I would say also kind of say something not only about the evolution of the refugee regime, but also kind of the contestation and evolution of the so-called liberal international order. And with that, I would like to close.